Vanessa G. Nelson, and I'm president of Expert Human Resources. I'm also the president of Elite HR Professionals Association, which is an HR group that meets, and we're in Genesee County, and we meet bi-monthly. And today we're having a meeting, and I want to take you inside. So let's see if we can get inside here.
Questions, along with all the information on law and regulation. Right here, very quickly, is where we're at as of yesterday. Just some statistics. Tells you the scope and what we're confronted with. Return to work. This is, well, go back a little bit. Thank you. Next screen. Some of this data goes back, and it seems like March was years ago, as opposed to a few months ago. Our data was collected in April, May of this year, and we did another one. We did actually two surveys at the start to kind of see where employers were going and then where they went to. So this data, even though we're only in September, is probably a little aged and may reflect what has been or was planned as opposed to what's going on today. I'll even point out, I think some of these statistics that you'll see probably, reflected the trend and are a lot different, today. So in terms of returning to work, many of us are going to stay closed office-wise, but we have returned to work remotely. If you are bringing your people on site, you got to be very safety conscious. This is going to be kind of a constant theme of this presentation today. And to do so, you're going to have to go get into ongoing monitoring as prescribed by the CDC. MIOSHA, of course, picked it up, but mainly the state of Michigan's governor's executive orders that are in place. Next screen, please. We asked back then, should you bring employers back? You need to be prepared to do that if you did. Those that are still working remote, you have your own considerations, but my wife, who technically won't be back in her office, she's told until January, had to go in yesterday and today. So you have to have the protocols in place, be ready to go. Leadership's going to need to be providing assurance to their employees that they're doing what's needed so that they can come in. And to do that, we're going to have to be looking at, of course, policies, rules, and regulations. I myself, even this morning, and I've got a beautiful empty 9,000 square foot office here because all our people are remote. I took my little thermometer, put it up against me, and then went to our computer and answered a set of questions this morning, saying that I was okay to be in the office and that I voluntarily agreed to be in the office today. And that's for our records. So leadership needs to be on top of direction, assigning resources, and making sure everything's in place for employees to be in the office, even though they may still be working remote. They may need to show up for this or that. And that's just kind of the reality today. Next slide, please. As we saw a couple months ago, and I should be wearing different glasses here because I can barely see this, we need to be ready to assign roles. I'm sure we're all past that. But more today, we're taking a lot of questions on this. We want to be updating and creating the necessary policies. Back when we did this just a couple of months ago, you saw that employers weren't really that far along in terms of being ready for these executive orders and what they're requiring of employers to have people back in the office. So even then, developing plans to return to work and so forth, we're in the early stages. Next screen, please. This basically covers the basics. Leaders should have been already, again, if they're bringing people back. Communication, making sure there's signage in place if you're bringing people on, distribute communications to employees. This is where, again, we were at. These numbers on the right indicated that at the time, and I'm sure it's much higher for employers who have opened up, that where they were at in terms of these key reopening activities. Next slide, please. Here we're turning kind of, and this is where we've been responding to a lot of questions in the last 45 days. It went from, I don't have to come in, everything's closed and so forth, to now everything's in place employer-wise. You can go back one, please. One more. And employees were actually saying, look, I'm not comfortable coming back to work. As we know, the hold on a second, I'm gonna bring up a little thing on my end here. The FFCRA, the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, went into play. It applied to all employers under 500. It provided two things: paid sick leave for up to 2 weeks or 80 hours at the employee's regular rate or the minimum wage, whichever was higher. And this was when we applied when you're under a government quarantine or stay-at-home order. We've been opening up, but if you're now found to exhibit some of the symptoms and have been, and particularly been tested positive, you're going to be quarantined or should self-quarantine. You're going to be eligible for this benefit as well. Just last week, the governor came out with a executive order outlining the symptoms that would be, would create the eligibility in particular, the necessity to stay away from others and take care of yourself. They refined these COVID symptoms that employers and employees have to be watching for. So if any of these symptoms are exhibited, employers are going to have to send that employee for a diagnosis, or the employee should take themselves to for a self-diagnosis, get a test, and they are protected under this particular aspect of the FFCRA and up for 2 weeks. Then you have the paid sick leave component of the FFCRA, and that provides up to 2 weeks or 80 hours at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of minimum wage if you're caring for somebody under quarantine or a stay-at-home order. And this is where we're going to be getting into the return to school. You also have eligibility for the FFCRA Employee Family Medical Leave Act component of it if you're caring for a child whose school, child care provider, or place of care is unavailable due to COVID. And this is where we're at, I think, in many respects today, and I will get into that a little bit at the end, or more at the end of the presentation when we talk about return to school. Lastly, the FFCRA provides paid family leave for 10 additional weeks at 2/3 the employee's regular rate of pay, and that is if you are caring for your child whose school, child care provider, or place of care is unavailable. That's defined as closed, and you've been working for at least 30 days there. So that's kind of the fundamentals very quickly of FFCRA that we're going to be using to work our way through this particular period of the pandemic. But getting back to the presentation, employers are going to have to, and leaders within the employers are going to have to show some empathy. At first, it was perhaps empathy of the fear of returning, and now it's going to be empathy towards employees who have children who can't return to work. This is the employee relations side of things. We're a management association, so the bulk of my questions for the last 45 to 60 days have been kind of on the dark side. In other words, how do I get these people and what's my rights as an employer and so forth. but we've been emphasizing that employers are going to have to be working with their employees and probably be very flexible in terms of their policies and practices, not only to avoid possible lawsuits, but we've got to work with these employees. It's going to be very tough, I think, going forward, finding qualified employees. So holding on to those trained people, I think we all know as HR, makes a lot of sense. Next slide, please. So just to kind of sum up what we have in front of us as HR leaders and management, we got fears from staff about returning to work. And here are the hard facts on our side: compliance and legal liability. We've got to make sure our safety and health protocols are up to date with OSHA and MyOSHA. Review your workers' comp, ADA, FLSA, EEO, and whistleblower, as well as, of course, the FFCRA policies and practices, and keep them up. Review general liability insurance coverages and reporting requirements. I'm not hearing a lot of good stuff about our insurance providers jumping in and helping out in this regard. So take a look at your policies, but those that don't have it probably can't get it. And this one is important, though, and certainly last but not least in this little area. Make sure that you're on top of your privacy and disclosure requirements. You're going to be responsible for and be exposed to a lot of medical information. Even this morning, I guess an employee tells you they're 98.6. That's information that they've shared, but you're going to have to maintain confidentiality, particularly if the person comes in and says, geez, I tested out at 101. Looks like I have a fever. Confidentiality, that medical information, if you disclose it to colleagues, in particular with names, is going to get you into trouble, as we know. We're going to have to be looking at modified work scheduling arrangements. ASE had been getting into remote work coincidentally enough, about a year before all this came down. And so it wasn't a tough transition for us, but other employers, maybe not so much. But I think employers are going to have to look at the ideas, of course, of, do we have to have people working 100% of the time? Can we move schedules around? And in getting down to the parents with school-age children, I would suggest that this is going to be something that a lot of employers are going to be having to deal with and find themselves having to be flexible. Keep in mind that the FFCRA, if you've got some protections in place, and I was just reading this morning before this program started, that there's lawsuits started in Georgia and one in Michigan where an employer discharged an employee who said, hey, I'm sick, I got COVID. Well, and we know that's an out and out violation. But employers are kind of getting tense in terms of, their business's survival and maybe making decisions they think are rational and such, but are really going to be a violation. In other words, disciplining and discharging employees, perhaps for reasons other than FFCRA. The plaintiff's attorneys are going to be all over that, and they're going to be pointing to that situation. So make sure that when these adverse employment decisions are being made, that you're looking at all the corners there, and don't just create pretextual reasons for say discipline or discharge. You're going to have to prove that against the counter allegation that you really did it just because the employee was experiencing difficulties as protected by the FFCRA. I'm sure we've all looked at our vacation and PTO admin over the last few months, because we need to see how that coordinates with those benefits that are provided with FFCRA. We're all wrestling with the new economy. I think in the case of lawsuits, as well as the impact that we're going to confront as the government incentives run down and everything, and we have to right size our businesses, we're going to have some big challenges that's going to have a negative impact on business as a whole. So yes, we're all involved in right sizing our workforce, and if we haven't already, because the government incentives have been in play, you're going to be doing it as the economy impacts businesses. And then, of course, we're going to lose possibly experienced workers. Some workers of nearing retirement age may already be considering, well, this is a good time for me to exit. Other, employees may, fear for the stability of their current employer's viability, if you will, and they may be looking around at this point. So we've got to be ready to address that. Next slide, please. Policy and practice considerations of employers. One more.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I think a lot of us I get this question, well, should we be updating our handbook to address, COVID? And that's a question that requires, I guess, two answers. Definitely, we've got to be looking at all our policies and administrative procedures. There's a myriad of policies, I'm probably preaching to the master choir here. All these backroom administrative procedures that need to be put in place and documented to address all the issues going on here. But in terms of an employee handbook, where you summarize a lot of things, you want to give some general guidance, but manage employees' expectations and understanding of how to administer policy. You have your management administration policies and procedures that are probably much more, I want to say, robust than you might have in terms of a simple employee handbook policy that might address maybe pandemic. But where I'm going with this is, maybe in terms of the handbook, you just have a general communicable diseases policy. I recently reviewed a handbook that had an HIV policy left over from many years ago. And I think my point is, I think, if we get, too particular in terms of this situation and putting it in our handbook, we may be making a lot of adjustments very quickly. I would recommend, having maybe a general policy in the handbook about what to do, maybe change a few safety references, but then you get into the emergency plan, which we're all supposed to have in place by executive order. And of course, with bigger employers, they might have a business continuity plan. My point, I think, is to show that, employers did not have, in terms of a formal policy, too much in the way of a pandemic policy. I'm sure a lot more have communicable disease policies nowadays. But then again, and this gets to the rest of the presentation, you're going to need a lot of administrative policies that back up what would be just a general summary of the employer's approach to addressing any kind of communicable disease in the workplace. I'm still watching employee handbook policies evolve during this time, but my counsel so far has been stick to a broad communicable disease policy, perhaps in your handbook, and then develop policies and procedures behind that to support the particular situation at hand. If we had time, I'd be interested in seeing everybody here's thoughts on that. But I just think things are moving too quickly to throw something into a handbook that's very detailed. Next policy, please. Or I'm sorry, slide. Okay. And as I've been saying, here are all the policies employers by way of our surveys we're already looking at. You can see there remote work or telecommuting, way out there now. FMLA, of course, they were trying to figure out how EFMLA fit into their FMLA policy. That's for employers over 50, of course. Return to work requirements. You can see again, all the way down in terms of policies and benefit considerations that employers jumped on a couple months ago in hard data numbers here. Next policy, or next slide, please, excuse me. Okay, what are we doing? We're looking at sick leave and other time off policies. Those are very, very much in play right now. As we get into the school year and where we're at exactly right now, we want family and child care practices looked at. And then, of course, we want to be concerned about liability. So visitor and other building protections need to be looked at overall. And then medical information disclosure policy, particularly in small operations. Like it or not, everybody's going to kind of know who got sick and so forth, but you as the employer are going to have to maintain confidentiality and practice a lot of practical discretion in terms of communications of that. On one hand, as we all know, you have somebody who's sick and that's confidential information, but on the other hand, you have the employees who may have been working with them and exposed to them if they were in an office or production environment or however a live situation there is. So this is kind of a chart of a flow of policy consideration and development in the areas that are impacted. Next slide. So again, on the theme of where we should be focusing our policy and practice program development, safety and health. Number one, I believe, paid time off and sick time policies as it coordinates or integrates with the FFCRA requirements. Of course, FMLA policy compliance. The FFCRA is temporary. That's going to go away if they don't re-up it. And there is even talk now that they probably are going to be extending a number of the programs or laws that they put in place. You've got to be updating employee communications policies to meet remote work challenges. And then of course, for the non-exempt employees, and I know I'm jumping around here, but for non-exempt employees who are working remotely, make sure you're on top of their hours worked activities. If they're responding to emails and working on, even with their mobile device, that is hours worked. We saw a recent guidance, and this gives the employers a little bit of breathing room in terms of the argument that any work that the employee does is suffered or permitted. That's FLSA. The DOL recently said that, yeah, employer, you are supposed to make a good faith effort to stay on top of that if your employees are putting in hours, but they don't expect you to make a investigation or go much beyond, letting employers know the policies in place, how they should practice it. Again, if your supervisors are knowledgeable about something going on, particularly hours being worked, that knowledge is imputed onto the employer, so you can't get out from under it. But in terms of employees who just come back retroactively and say, well, you should have known I was working Sunday night and getting ready for Monday, and you told them you've got a policy in place saying, record your hours, and these are our work hours. The DOL, at least in terms of this administration, won't grind you too bad. Next slide, please. So just real quickly, top employment law considerations, again, in terms of the theme of protecting our organizations. Next slide. Employers need to monitor their safety practices, their pay practices. This is something that we're going to get into, as employees say, I'm at risk, or I've got somebody who is at risk at home, that I'm concerned that my exposure, you're going to have to, the request is going to come out into the employer that I want to work away from this, or I don't want to work. You're going to have to go through the reasonable accommodation dialogue with them to determine whether you have to provide, you have to allow that you can allow them to work, or whatever their accommodations might be. Big issue, and I say, I use this trite thing, we're at the tip of the iceberg. I think of the iceberg that is underneath the ocean, we're seeing something the size of an ice cube right now in terms of lawsuits over adverse employment actions that came during the FFCRA period. This is going to be the fallback for anybody who may have been discharged discipline, is that they should have been covered under FFCRA. So make sure you're documenting any adverse employment decision, and think, review it twice before pulling the trigger, if you know what I'm getting at. And then, of course, failing to properly conduct layoffs and reinstatements. We are getting into, and I am getting calls for just simple, where we've gotten through the FFCRA, we've gotten through our CARE PPP loan dollars, and we've got to do a layoff. Make sure you're doing it correctly. Businesses also need to monitor, and this is on the outward facing side of the business, customer, guests, and vendor safety. And this, I believe, is where employers are going to face the biggest risk of liability and cost, because unlike on the employer facing side, you've got maybe workers' comp to cover the loss of a job or a loss of pay due to employment, or I should say due to COVID. Guests, vendors, and customers, it's purely going to be a civil action. Michigan is working on legislation. This is the GOP-led legislature is working on legislation to limit employer liability. It's not expected to go too far. We had Brian Calley talk to our members and their members. He's the president of SBAM, as well as the former lieutenant governor. And he doesn't expect the governor to go for anything that would limit business liability in Michigan. So that relies on the federal side of things, and we've got kind of a log jam there. It's kind of a flip of it. You've got a president and a Senate that would be probably in favor, and this is why the extension of the CARE Act PPP and the unemployment benefits is hung up, is because the GOP-led federal legislature, of course, wants to limit the liability, but the House Democrats are saying no way. So we've got a kind of a logjam in this area in terms of protecting employers both at federal and state level. Next slide. Has anybody implemented payroll tax deferral? Again, I want to be respectful of this group's time. I had this as a question if I was moving quickly. This is something that the president initiated by executive order. It's federal. It allows.
Excuse me, I'm going to interrupt.
Yep.
Could you kind of, we don't want to talk about politics at all. So
okay.
Just kind
well, this is not politics. This is
okay. I should have told.
This is the payroll deferral program. It's the agency. Trump put it in there by executive order. However you want it. Employers now have the elective ability to allow employees to suspend their FICA tax deferral. These are some of the terms that are part of this. Because it's not legislative or regulatory, it's pretty loose. But I think the thing to know is the employer needs to elect to do this. It's not something the employee can necessarily do. And the one big risk is, as I say at the end there, what if the employee quits and can't or won't pay back the deferred payroll tax that they wanted deferred, and the employer may be on the hook. So just be concerned about that if you're getting into that and your employer's looking at it. I haven't heard a lot of employers jump on that. So go on, next slide, please. Okay, slide. Again, returning to work, which we're all kind of wrestling with to some degree, practical considerations for remote work, the new requirements of leaders of people. This is something that, you know, we're going to have our leaders be on top of and be, doing what they're paid to do, lead, as long as recommendations. Next slide. Telecommuting, and this is some pre-COVID data here. You can see most employers, use telecommuting at manager's discretion, and then a large group on the graph on the left shows that organization-wide was a big part of it if they did it. So that's about 71 firms, not a big sample, but you can kind of see that telecommuting was taking place pre-COVID. And then the different types of telecommuting arrangements you can see there. Again, keeping in mind it's pre-COVID, this data, so I'm sure these numbers look a lot different today. Next slide. Here are some practical considerations for remote work and return to school. Again, keep on top of what's not working. As I said a little earlier, we're going to need to help working parents. If we can, allow work from home, consider flexibility, consider job sharing, temporary or part-time work. Employers will need to take school schedules into account. My wife was dealing with an attorney on personal business, and the lady emailed back that she could meet with my wife and I, Tuesday morning, but couldn't meet at noontime or after because she had to pick up her child. So this is the new reality today, that whereas before you kind of hid that or that was discreet, now it's going to be right out there. Encourage use of company EAP. I think this is something underrated. We know a lot of employers do have that, at least mid to large size employers, but encourage the use of the EAP in terms of helping employers through these stressful times. Identifying and finding childcare providers in the area. Be ready to deal with anxiety and depression if that comes, if there's some evidence of that getting into the workplace. And then there's going to be a lot of alternative classroom options, which we'll get into in a little bit. Provide employees with training on technology and such so that they can better work remote. Establish clear ground rules and set expectations. This again gets to how you're going to work as opposed to whether you're going to work. And I think these days you really need a policy and procedure, administratively at least, on remote work. Keep them updated. Things are changing, if not weekly, monthly here. Next slide. More information regarding leadership of people during these times. Employers are going to want to model the behavior they want. What needs to happen for my direct reports to continue their work. These are some suggestions for HR people to take back to their leadership and perhaps implement to assist in this period right now. A lot of communication, a lot of training, and a lot of leadership by example is what this particular slide gets into. And I think we as HR leaders have to be keeping in mind, even though we're probably 90% of the time wrestling with compliance issues, at least in terms of where I'm coming from. Next slide. Here's some thought starters in terms of, I think there's about 5 items like that, Vanessa. I don't know if you can click on the rest of them. There we go. These are some thought starters that you need to get your supervisors and managers, cognizant of as they're dealing with all the change that's going on now. Again, I provided Vanessa this presentation that I think everybody can, if she'll send that out to everybody, they can look at their leisure.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will, absolutely, yes.
Yeah, I know I'm struggling here with the size of this. I'm not sure what I'm doing wrong, but okay, next slide here.
You're doing great. You're doing great.
If you see me going like this, it's obviously a bifocal issue. Okay, to the heart of our
Okay, go ahead.
to the heart of the most recent our issue at hand here, return to school. We've kind of covered it broadly, but can we continue to work from home? Is that something that we're going to be able to do? As I mentioned, my wife, they're out, and I think many employers, particularly who have downtown offices, will not be returning back to work except for particular situations or maybe emergency meetings. So a lot of us are working from home, but those that aren't, but may have to, we need to be looking at other work scheduling options, flex time or part-time for positions. And then, of course, we've got the law that protects, as well as the executive orders that protects employment during this time. But those are going to be, at least at this point, winding down in December. Again, I'll prognosticate a little bit here and say that I bet a lot of this will be extended out. That would be, if you wanted to bet me a 10 on it, I think we'll see those extended out. But you're probably going to have states versus federal conflict there, and dissonance, if you will, politically, and I won't go there. Okay, next slide. Here is the most recent guidance we have received just this week on return to work compliance considerations. As I mentioned, the executive order talks about, schools being unavailable or childcare being unavailable. We're talking closed here. But right now we've got schools that are doing virtual classes. This is considered closed under the FFCRA, and therefore the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Act component of FFCRA is in play. So employers do have that protection out to 12 weeks if the school is going virtual only. Next slide. Keep in mind, FFCRA does not mean the employee gets a reload of their 12 weeks. If they've used some already, employers are going to be tracking that. They only get what's left that they haven't used so far. So there probably is going to be a lot of employees who may have used a few weeks earlier in the year, and now they're going to, have to perhaps use it when they don't have childcare. They're only going to have that protection out to the amount of time into that 12 weeks that they've worked. The hybrid school option, we knew kind of where this was going a while ago. The field assistance bulletin from the DOL in June talked about camps and such. If the camps are closed for a day or not operational, that's considered closed as far as the FFCRA EFMLA component goes. And then we received just this last week, or this week, I'm losing track of the weeks here, that the DOL formally adopted this as far as hybrid school options. Next slide. Now, some schools may get into, and this is probably, I'm hearing most schools are not returning, of course, as you are, but what about schools that are transitioning to a reopening in a few months, and they choose to go in person, virtual, or hybrid, and leave that option out there? If the employee still chooses virtual with no health issues for that choice, it's considered open. It's only when when the school says, no, this is what you have to do. And this may come into play with a hybrid. In other words, and I know this is true at some of the private schools, they're doing, you know, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, and rotating students through. The FFCRA benefit coverage applies for those days that your child cannot go to that school. So you get into this now interim or intermittent use of FMLA, and that has to be mutually agreed upon by the employer and employee. Next slide. Lastly, if an employee has been successfully teleworking since March and has never needed to leave, should it be allowed when you reopen? And the guidance is yes. So if, you know, suddenly the employer in reopening, you know, says, okay, everybody's returning, and the person says, well, look, I've still got issues, problems, or so forth. Can you provide an accommodation? They're going to have a tough position to defend if they say, no, now you got to come in, when they can successfully do the work remotely. So keep that in mind, because the mindset of the employer is going to change, and they're going to want to go back perhaps to older processes and operational activities. It needs to have, of course, a business route, and then take a look at these jobs one by one to see whether, if somebody says, I can't come back, I'm high risk, or I've got at-risk people at home, I prefer to work out, you're going to need to go through that accommodation review. And then FFC cover, this last component is, hey, this kid is old enough to stay at home alone. The FFCRA coverage for children, it arguably does not go past 14 years of age, I have been told, unless special circumstances exist. There has to be childcare because of special needs children and so forth, is just a quick example of that. Components that we learned lately in terms of return to school considerations. I think that is the last slide, Vanessa. Hopefully I didn't take up most of your meeting on this. And
No, you
questions
did.
or,
I have some questions here that I'm going to read.
okay.
No, not that. Can you ask about employees requiring some to come in part-time and not others? Did you get to understand the question? You want me to read it again?
I'm not sure. Is just a general, can we require certain employees to come in part-time and others not?
Right, yes.
Yeah, the employer still has the control over the work scheduling. Again, you have to, if I'm again understanding the scope of this question, you have to take into consideration compliance-wise whether the employee has a legitimate reason to not work their normal regular schedule. Asking, you know, can I go to part-time from full-time? That is up to the employer, and of course we've got to take into consideration ADA if those facts are present. Absent, you know, all facts, it's purely at an employer's discretion. Again, if you want to clarify that, I can get into it. I'm thinking of so many circumstances either way that I guess I should have just say it depends, you know?
It appears they're asking from a consistency point of view.
Yeah, I think for a period of time, employers are going to have, as well as, you know, the employers are going to have latitude to be discreet even within a class of employees, but I don't think that's going to last, because as we all know, you got to treat everybody within a class of employees pretty equally. And that's from the employee relations side. From a compliance side, I think the employer is going to be, you know, looking very specifically at the circumstances of the request to go part-time, particularly if it runs adverse to what they need to happen. In other words, they need somebody there full-time. So now you get into, well, why, and can we, do we have to accommodate them under ADA, or can we accommodate for positive employer-employee relations purposes? In terms of a class of employee and allowing one individual or one group of employees to go part-time that maybe have a certain, gender demographic or racial demographic, yeah. Adverse impact is going to be in play if we want to get into that area.
And so it's basically, if you can prove a business necessity too,
I think, right. If you start there, I think you're in good shape. But then you got to keep in mind the ADA and then adverse impact analysis. All right, adverse impact. Excuse me. I'm affirmative action plan side of things.
Okay, the next question is, how about FFCRA pay? Is it not an endless pot of money? The government only requires employers to give them 80 hours before they are required to utilize PTO.
Yeah, that's getting back to the 6 criteria, or I should say FFCRA benefit allowances. If I can really quickly bring that back up on my side, sorry. We're talking about, there we go. We're talking about the paid sick leave side. That provides 2 weeks or 80 hours of the employee's regular rate or minimum wage at the employee's regular. If you're under government quarantine or stay-at-home order, you've been advised by a health care provider to self-quarantine, and you're seeking diagnosis for COVID-19 symptoms. Those are the paid sick leave side of FFCRA, and that's limited to 2 weeks. And then you get into the other side, which is the emergency family medical leave, and that covers when you're caring for somebody under quarantine or stay-at-home order, or you're caring for your child whose school, child care provider, or place of care is unavailable. In other words, closed, as we just discussed. That's where you get into the 2/3 of the employee's regular rate, and that can go up to 10 weeks. I should say 12 weeks. 2 weeks initially, and if you're caring for a child whose school is out or their place of care is unavailable, that goes out an additional 10 weeks at 2/3 of the employee's regular rate of pay. So yeah, those are the FFCRA's leave requirements.
Okay, and now I'm gonna unmute. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm gonna see if I can unmute. If you want to unmute yourself and ask a question, please feel free. Sorry about the little rough edges. I'm just learning Zoom. Mike and I are working to try to get it right.
Yeah, I apologize for the speed that I went through all that. I know you know that there's a lot behind what I covered there. I wish I could go into more detail.
No problem. So Heather has a question. Go ahead, Heather.
Yes.
I do. We, here where I work, we employ what I would consider the essential workforce. So we have custodians that are cleaning schools, and we have security guards that are securing buildings. So those are both considered essential. They can't do their work from home. So what we are facing at this point is individuals that say, I just don't want to come back to work. I don't feel comfortable coming back to work, or I don't want to work around other people. So I guess we're at the point where we have to staff these positions. And obviously we're not getting applicants from outside. We're just not getting applicants like every other employer that's looking to hire people. So, you know, at some point we have to tell these employees, you're an essential, you're considered essential workforce, you have to come back. What are our obligations to keep those people employed if they're just refusing to come back to work just because they don't want to?
Well, I'm gonna put a management hat here, and employee relations aside. If it's just purely fear or concern, there are no protections. At this point, the employer can elect to terminate the employee. I do counsel that you look into the situation, get your ducks in a row regarding possible accommodation and such. But the situation you described, you as the employer will probably have to let them know, look, if you can't come back to work, we're filling your position, you're no longer employed here. And this, I think I mentioned, having that documentation and everything dead to rights, those employees, once they realize that their recourse is limited, and that includes loss of unemployment insurance at that point, if they failed to come back to work, they are not eligible for unemployment if you decide to fight that claim, which, again, not getting too far into the weeds here, as an employer, particularly if you've taken PPP loan money, you're required to report that to the UIA, that they refuse to return to work. So yeah, there's some dark things that you got to get into, and getting back to the basics of it, it's purely fear and there's nothing more that you have to consider, that then you can let them go. But document.
Anything further?
No, that's it.
Okay, Lori, I think, had a question. Lori, did you have a question?
No, actually, my questions are being answered as we go.
Oh, great. Okay, anybody else with a question? Okay, it looks like, Mike, you've done a wonderful job, because I was expecting a ton of questions, but you were very thorough. You did a great job.
I probably shell shocked them with the speed and ferocity I went through all that information. So, you know, you're welcome to, Vanessa, if you get questions, kick them over to me. I'll be glad to respond, you know, afterwards, particularly in terms of clarifications. I hope that presentation gives you more of a foundation for my remarks.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Can we give him a hand? Great job, Mike. And so thank you, and you're welcome to stay on, and we're going to move on. We just have a couple other things to finish here. And next we're going to have...
If you want, I'll stay tight if a question comes up, but otherwise, thank you very much.
That'll be perfect. We appreciate you. Next up is Katrina Royster, who's with the Valley Area Agency on Aging. She is also a board member, and I meant to mention Geraldine Klitsch is a board member as well. So if you ever have questions for the group, the three of us are the ones right now. And Katrina is going to talk about remote work policies. And Katrina, if you want to go ahead, please.
Absolutely. Good morning, everyone. It's good to see some of your faces on the Zoom call on today. And thank you, Mike, for that awesome presentation. I just want to piggyback. Mike did talk a little bit about having remote policies, and just kind of give some tips as to if you do not currently have a policy that you are in the process of developing. Just kind of give you some tips as it relates to what you should include in those policies. Like Mike, our agency had already many remote work processes in place. So it was thank goodness, it was a somewhat of an easy transition for our staff to work remote in their home. But again, due to the pandemic, a lot of you who maybe don't have operations in place as far as working remotely, I'm sure are in the process of completing or implementing those policies. So again, you want to make sure to establish a clear and consistent guidelines regarding employees working remotely or working in the field. And some of that language should include telling your staff that they must be accessible during their work hours. I know our agency utilized the Microsoft Teams platform. There are other platforms similar to Microsoft Teams, so that when your staff log into their laptop or their tablet at the start of their day, it would show that they're logged in. It will show if they're available or if they're busy or if they're in a meeting or if they're in a call. It's basically like a nice tracking mechanism as to see who is logged in for work that day. But there's other platforms. I saw a little bit of those platforms listed on Mike's presentation, but there are some Like Slack, for an example, is another platform that a lot of employers use. Also, there's a platform through Cisco WebEx. So if you don't have a remote working platform where you can kind of keep track of your staff, I advise you to check into that. I do know that Microsoft Teams is less expensive. It's not as intensive as Slack is, but it works very, very, very well as far as being able to track your staff, and it works very well with Outlook. So whatever you have on your calendar in Microsoft Outlook, it basically connects to your Microsoft Teams calendar. So say for instance, like right now, I'm on the Zoom call, and on my calendar, I have blocked from 8:30 to 10:30 for this meeting. So if my boss is trying to call me on Teams or someone's trying to reach me, they can see Katrina's busy. She's in a meeting right now. But I'm sure if I show green, I should be accessible, right? So if you're contacting your employees or you're calling them and they're not answering or something's going on, you shouldn't hear from Johnny tomorrow. Johnny should at least call you within a reasonable time frame as far as while he is working. So you want to make sure to have language in your policy is saying that staff must be accessible. Staff must attend, required meetings, making sure that your staff responds to their emails and checking their voicemails throughout the workday. Again, you shouldn't have to email someone and you don't hear back from them for 3 to 4 days. You've been calling, leaving voicemails, and they haven't responded back to you. Something's wrong, and you need to management needs to make sure that they check in with that employee to see what is going on. In the event a staff member is unable to work, just like you will call in on a normal work day pre-COVID, you still need to make sure to follow those policies and procedures and making sure you contact your supervisor and follow the protocol as it relates to calling in. And then also making sure that they set their out of office assistant, that they making sure on their work phone that they set the saying that they're out of the office and having an alternate voicemail set up as well. It's very, very vital during this time. Also too, you want to make sure that your staff, if they're having any difficulty with their technology, that is basically stated that you need to let me know that you're having problems with your laptop or your company cell phone's not working. Not just say, oh, my systems wasn't working, my Wi-Fi wasn't working, so I just didn't work today. That's considered a no-call, no-show, especially if you didn't let your supervisor know what was going on with you not being able to remote in or something. You need to make sure, again, to keep the communication process open more now than ever, especially working remotely. Also, too, when you're having Teams meetings, like how right now, how we're having the Zoom platform meeting, it's important that you make sure to have your staff turn on their video. You want to make sure they're actually up and ready for work. You want to make sure Sarah's not laying on the bed, still asleep while she's in the call of the meeting. You want to make sure that they are technically on the call, that they just don't have just logged in and they're outside doing lawn work or whatever the case may be. So you want to make sure that you have some policies around that as well. Please make sure to include that they're also following HIPAA policies and procedures as it relates to patient information or client information. You want to make sure you have something in there to making sure that the staff are following HIPAA policies. And also as it relates to the calendar, you want to make sure that it's vital that they have on their calendar what the flow of their day looks like. So for an example, with me, I have this meeting, and I have on here other meetings that I have to do or reports, different things of that nature. And you also want to make sure that your staff is sharing their calendars with their supervisors. So you want to make sure you have access to their calendar so you can see exactly what Johnny is working on. I hope we don't have a Johnny on the call, but you want to see exactly what Johnny's working on, making sure that, if Johnny is showing red that he's busy, but nothing's on his calendar, what is Johnny doing? You want to make sure that you basically are holding staff accountable to their work day, because again, we all are working remote right now. As you can see, I'm in my basement. Right now, I'm not in the office. So we want to make sure that staff time can be accounted for. Also, too, we want to make sure that your staff is still taking lunch hour breaks, making sure that they're not just because burnout can get very done very easily working remotely, as Mike had mentioned earlier, as far as people working throughout the day, doing emails, sending emails 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. You just want to make sure that your staff knows to work during their work hours and to make sure that they are taking breaks. That's very important. I have to remind myself sometimes. Sometimes I come downstairs and I'm in my little dome, if you will, and I'm like, oh my God, I haven't ate anything. It's 4 o'clock. So it's easy to do. It's very easy to do. So you want to make sure that you encourage staff to do that. Have weekly meetings with your team. That's very important. I know you may have your one-on-ones. You may speak with one of your managers every day, but you have more than just one. You have a team of people. So you want to make sure that you are at least meeting with them on a weekly basis during some type of video platform. And again, I encourage you, if you haven't done so already, to seek platforms such as Microsoft Teams, Slack, and Cisco WebEx as well. Last but not least, when you have staff that's off, we want to make sure to still encourage your staff to take vacation times, even though they're not safe to do so and fly to Miami right now. But they still need to utilize their vacation time. If they have staycations, it is what it is. But you want to make sure that they are still using their vacation time, because you don't want to have staff. I don't know what everyone's policies look like, but I know our policy is that we don't roll your whole bank over from one year to the next. We will do a percentage of that, but if you don't use it, you pretty much lose it. So you want to make sure to encourage your staff to continue to still use their vacation times, and make sure when they are off that it reflects on their calendar too, so people can see, your manager, because you may have 20 employees and you might forget. You're not a robot. You may forget that Johnny's off, and you go to his calendar. Oh, that's right, Johnny is on vacation today and Monday. So you want to make sure to encourage your staff to use their calendar more now than ever. Lastly, we want to make sure that you have a policy regarding your supervisors, holding them accountable for things, making sure, again, that they're scheduling team meetings with their staff, making sure that they're having a staff person who's having any challenges, that they reach out to them just like they would if they were in the building, and see what's going on, making sure that you're giving your staff the tools to be successful while working remote. It is a transition. It most definitely is a transition. But once you get into a routine and you have your workspace, whether it's in your basement, whether it's in your kitchen, whether it's in your living room, just making sure that you make sure your staff is okay. You're checking in on them. You make sure that they are utilizing the EAP program if they need it. I know we've had a lot of staff that had to take bereavement during this pandemic. And you just want to make sure to still check on them, to still make sure that your staff is doing okay. And it's very important to have those video calls, because it's easy to hide and have stop your video and just show your name, because your supervisor is not being able to connect with you to see, it appears to me that, Susan wasn't really engaged in the meeting today. Let me reach out to Susan and see if she's having any difficulties. Let me see what's going on. So you want to make sure to please put things like that in your policies. I didn't go through every single bullet that we have on some of our community policies, but I tried my best to touch on some of the key ones that we make sure to do at our agency. Everyone's remote policies are going to look different based off the scope of the work and what they do. But all of our policies should be familiar with some respect. Does anyone have any questions about any of the tips that I presented today? And I have no problem with even sharing some of those policies with anyone on the team. Just please reach out to me, and on the call, reach out to me, and I most definitely don't have a problem sharing some of the information we have at our agency.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you what is your process for communicating with employees when new breaking news or whatever you want to call it comes to light and you need to inform them? What is your process or the best process?
Absolutely. So our CEO is very, very good about sending out the governor executive orders whenever there's breaking news. Like yesterday, the governor spoke at 2:30 on yesterday, and we had like 6 or 7 executive orders that came through our email network. Boom, boom, boom. As far as what's going on, as far as in our area, making sure we let our staff know when we switch phases, letting our staff know. Again, to piggyback on Mike, when we have our agency disinfected. At our agency, we had that done by a professional company that came in and used the fogging method and all those different methods that they use to disinfect and clean the agency. So we make sure to inform our staff of that. We continue to have a Monday monthly memo that go out to our staff every first Monday of the month, advising our staff as to what's going on, where we're at, what we're looking to do. We still have team meetings, we have executive staff meetings, we have management staff meetings. So just communication is the key. And of course, in this world we live in, email, I mean, you can reach the masses just by sending out one email. So pretty much that way, Vanessa. And it's been very, very, very successful, very successful. And the staff is very appreciative, knowing that we're transparent. We're telling them what's going on. We're letting them know, you know, once we have things done and what we're doing to keep them safe. And, you know, we're one of the pillars in the area that are passing out PPE to various provider networks that we work with. We're actually having a mask drive up to mask up event on next Tuesday for our senior citizens in the area, Genesee, Lapeer, and Shiawassee counties. We're encouraging them to drive up to get free masks. We're going to have other agencies there passing out information as well. We're going to have a census worker there at the event for those who have not completed the census, so they can pull right over to a parking spot. Do not get out of your car, please. But they can be able to get that information taken care of. So that's going to be held again next Tuesday from 11 to 2 p.m. So if you know of any seniors, they tell them drive up to Mask Up. They're going to get some good information as well as 2 free masks. It's just a drive-through type of thing. It's going to be held at 225 East 5th Street, downtown Flint, in the parking lot there. So we're also doing that as well as passing out PPE again to other networking providers in the area. Any more questions? I think something. Do you address drug and alcohol use while working remotely? As Mike had mentioned, your personal policy manual, you should have information in there about drug use. So again, it's vital that, again, that you're checking in with your staff, that you are visible, that you can clearly see if someone is, you know, slouched over or they're sipping on a Corona while they're on the meeting or something like that. You just want to make sure to advise your staff. So that's just the same difference as a dress code policy. You want to advise your staff that even though we're working remotely, the handbook is a handbook. Everything still applies. Any more questions? It's so good to see you guys. I see you giving thumbs up, Trish. It's so good to see you and Julie, and I don't see Jim on the call. I think he was on the call, but it's so good to see you all. And Tim, we talk frequently, so it's good to see you as well on the call.
Good to see you also.
Mm-hmm. All right, there being none, Vanessa, the floor is yours.
Okay, well, I want to thank everyone for attending today. A special thanks to Katrina Royster, and especially our speaker for the day, Mr. Michael Burns. Mike, did you want to give another shout out to your company, or you want to say anything else, sir?
Yeah, appreciate it. I just invite everybody, because it's open, and this is something we've done at our website for all employers, because as most associations, we have a members only section, but our COVID FAQ, a lot of COVID information is open to all employers. So if you go to www.aseonline.org, you should be able to access the COVID information that we've been producing throughout this whole thing. And a lot of good compliance information. It's updated daily, if not more, depending on what's going on. So you're all welcome to access that particular site. And of course, if you're not already a member, take a look at us. It's a huge value, particularly to smaller HR departments with limited time, resources, and staff to apply to all the things that we have to be on top of normally and now in this particular period of our careers.
Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for being patient with us as we got things together this morning, right, Mike?
Yeah, that was I've learned, get a prep period going, but that doesn't guarantee anything either.
And I'll send out the PowerPoint slides to everyone.